It's live.
Are we live?
Yes, you're live.
Okay. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Thank you for tuning into our event tonight for commemorating the passing away of the greatest of God's creation, Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Alhamdulillah, we have a very packed event planned tonight. But before we begin, as always, we'll begin with a recitation of the Holy Quran by Brother Ali Yahya. I want to kindly request everybody to dedicate their attention to the recitation so that we will benefit from it. The brother will be reciting from Surah Rum, from the first ayat until verse 15. So let's please welcome with the salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad wa ajil farajah. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. ألف لام ميم. غلبت الروم في أدنى الأرض وهم من بعد غلبهم سيغلبون في بضع سنين لله الأمر من قبل ومن بعد ويومئذ يفرح المؤمنون بنصر الله ينصر من يشاء وهو العزيز الرحيم. وعد الله لا يخلف الله وعده ولكن أكثر الناس لا يعلمون. يعلمون ظاهرا من الحياة الدنيا وهم عن الآخرة هم غافلون. أولم يتفكروا في أنفسهم ما خلق الله السماوات والأرض وما بينهما إلا بالحق وأجل مسمى وإن كثيرا من الناس بلقاء ربهم لكافرون. أولم يسيروا في الأرض فينظروا كيف كان عاقبة الذين من قبلهم كانوا أشد منهم قوة وأثاروا الأرض وعمروها أكثر مما عمروها وجاءتهم رسلهم بالبينات فما كان الله ليظلمهم ولكن كانوا أنفسهم يظلمون. ثم كان عاقبة الذين أساءوا السوء أن كذبوا بآيات الله وكانوا بها يستهزئون. الله يبدأ الخلق ثم يعيده ثم إليه ترجعون. ويوم تقوم الساعة يبلس المجرمون ولم يكن لهم من شركائهم شفعاء وكانوا بشركائهم كافرين. ويوم تقوم الساعة يومئذ يتفرقون فأما الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات فهم في روضة يحبرون. صدق الله العلي العظيم. صلوا على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم ولعن أعداءهم أجمعين. Jazakallah khair, Brother Ali Yahya, for the beautiful recitation. So just give us a few minutes to join in with Brother Hussain Makke on Instagram, and then we will continue with the event. Then we're just waiting for him to begin his live stream. So by the time he begins, I guess I'll mention that today's event is brought to you forth by the efforts of the brothers and sisters from the McMaster AhlulBayt Islamic Society and the Imam Mahdi Youth group in Toronto. Please follow their social media pages on Instagram, on Facebook, and elsewhere, because your support allows them to organize events like these. So inshallah, with your support, with a follow, with a few likes on the posts, we'll be able to organize many more events like these in the future. So inshallah, with your support, with a follow, with a few likes on the posts, we'll be able to organize many more events like these in the future. Okay, I'm trying to join Hussain Makke's. Sayed, I don't know how I'm supposed to join your live stream. There's no button to join.
Assalamu alaikum. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah. Sayed, there's no button on your.
If you can send a request.
Is my voice coming? Yes.
To join. If you can send. 1 second. Send a request.
There's no.
To join.
There's normally a button that you could join, but there isn't over here.
Send a request. What does the first letter begin with of the account that you want to join through? What does the first letter begin with of the account that you want to join through?
Imam Mahdi Youth, I. We're just waiting a little bit to connect with the Sayed.
My brother Ali, how are you, bro? It's good to see you.
Sayed, do you want me to start the Instagram on the page and then add you to it? Okay, let's see if that works. Okay. Sorry for the delay.
Mahdi, I sent a request. That's it.
Sayed, are you part of the live stream right now on Instagram?
I was on the live stream. I sent a request, but I think you have to accept it. Should I try again?
I didn't get a request. Yeah, if you could send it one more time.
Let me try one more time.
Okay.
Okay, let's try this. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim.
Bismillah.
Okay. You have to be watching it first.
Oh, on yours or on Imam Mahdi? Because I started. Okay, let me try to go on yours again.
So I'm going to invite Imam Mahdi. Okay.
Okay, I'm coming right now. 1 second.
Be online.
Okay, I'm on your stream right now.
Okay.
It just said it ended. Oh, it began again. Okay.
Start it again. Yeah, it's not coming up.
Is it possible for you to, I don't know if you're following the page. Can you click the follow button? Maybe it has to do with that. You have to follow us for us to join your live stream, or?
You try. It just came up. No,
That's
it
weird.
doesn't have to do that. Okay.
No, okay.
I just added you. So now it's waiting.
Okay, perfect. Am I connected?
Yes, you're connected.
Okay, perfect. Alhamdulillah, it worked out. So the Instagram folks, we have Zoom with us as well, which is with my laptop behind the phone. So if I'm looking above the iPhone, it's because I'm looking at the Zoom. So I hope there's no confusion. So anyways, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Today our event is for commemorating the departure of Rasulullah, the best of Allah's creation, who was sent as a mercy to mankind, and as an example for human beings to model their character, their akhlaq, their beliefs, and their mannerisms after. In the Ziyarah of Rasulullah, it is stated, Alhamdulillah alladhi istanqadhana bika min al-halaka, wa hadana bika min al-dalala, wa nawarna bika min al-dhulma. Praise be to Allah, who by you delivered us from destruction, and by you guided us from misguidedness, and by you illuminated us from darkness. So Rasulullah, as we see, is a mercy to mankind because his existence serves as a medium for protection from destruction, for guidance from misguidedness, and illumination from darkness. However, he who was born as a Muslim but does not benefit from Rasulullah is the same thing, has benefited the same level from Rasulullah as a non-Muslim who never knew him. So it is upon us to take the step that although we were given the blessing of being born as Muslims, we have to still take the steps to get to know him, to benefit from his character. So today's event serves as that medium for us to inshallah learn more about our Holy Prophet and to inshallah apply what we learn into our lives and to ponder over that which we learn to ingrain it into our characters. We're honored to have Sayed Hussain Makke as a speaker for today's event. Although I don't think there's a need to give him an introduction since we all know him. And his nude from his face speaks for itself. His insight from his talks and his akhlaq, it speaks for itself. Despite his poor taste in Liverpool, everything else is perfect from him. But regardless, I must give an introduction for those who don't know him. So Sayed Hussain Makke is a student of the Islamic sciences who was born and raised in London. He holds a degree in journalism as well as an MA in religions and global politics from SOAS, University of London. He has been engaged in classical seminary studies at the Hawza of Lebanon for the last 8 years. Sayed Hussain has recently been engaging with youth from different communities around the world on issues of Islamic identity, spirituality, and mental health. He continues to work on his media projects, most notably his upcoming film, In Search of the Sacred, which addresses the spiritual crisis of modern man. I noticed when this description was given to me that it didn't mention his recent project, which is a spiritual warrior program. And I just wanted to mention that very quickly for those who don't know. It's basically a program that he has, which addresses the crisis of masculinity by teaching men how to be men in the truest sense of the word. The program will be based on the 4 masculine archetypes: the king, warrior, magician, and lover. And although it sounds a lot like Harry Potter, it's a very well-needed program in a time where men have forgotten how to become like men. So you could find more information regarding that on the Instagram page, which has a Carrier Spiritual Warrior program. And one last time, for those who weren't here at the beginning, this event is brought forth by the efforts of the brothers and sisters from the McMaster AhlulBayt Islamic Society and the Imam Mahdi Youth. So please follow their social media pages, and inshallah, with their support, we're able to provide and organize more events like this in the future. So inshallah, for tonight, we will begin with a speech by the Sayyid, followed by a eulogy, and then a question and answer section. The viewers can submit their questions on Instagram or on YouTube or Facebook or Zoom, wherever they're watching this, and they will be forwarded to me to ask the Sayyid after the event, after the eulogy, and we'll have 15 to 20 minutes for question and answer. So inshallah, we'll begin with the salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad.
Thank you, Mahdi, for that little plug. Didn't expect that. Shukran. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وآله الطيبين الطاهرين اللهم صل على محمد وعلى اللهم اخرجنا من ظلمات الوهم واكرمنا بنور الفهم اللهم افتح علينا باب رحمتك وانشر علينا من خزائن علومك يا ارحم الراحمين اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما. For my brothers and sisters watching at home, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I'm speaking to two screens for different accounts, Facebooks and YouTube and Zoom and Instagram, and I'm already feeling way too old for all this technology, but inshallah, I hope that everyone watching will have a fruitful discussion. So we're going to have a lecture on Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi on the various aspects of his life, followed by a Q&A, and then we will have a musibah to commemorate the night. So it would be about just over an hour of a program for those of you who would like to join us. Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah to everyone. The 28th of Safar is the date that it's narrated that the Prophet of Islam, Rasulullah, passes away. And especially when it comes to the Shi'i community in the West, I'd say in the West, not in the East, because in the East, alhamdulillah, I would say there are many historians that have done justice to his life story. But in the West, people always ask me, what books can we read to know about the life of the Prophet Muhammad? And how can we get to know him more? So I've committed these last few years to study a lot of history. And for many people watching, perhaps I have conducted courses with you. I've done these courses in London and Canada and even in America. And there is a 10-part series, a kind of a little crash course on the seerah of the Prophet from the Shi'i narrative on YouTube. If you want to check that out for a longer, if you want, discussion on the life of the Prophet, where we go into the different ahadith and speak about the different points of his life. However, in this lecture, what I wanted to do was to recount perhaps the most significant parts of his life that represent different portions of his life, and then go into what ensued at the time of his death, towards the time of his death, at the time of his death, and what happened afterwards. And perhaps the questions that the viewers will ask will make that more of a fruitful discussion when you really want to begin to answer what occurred at the end of the life of the Prophet. Because unfortunately, in our attempt to prioritize unity, we tend to forget about our own history and our own theology. And it's important that we do know what happened, what ensued with the Prophet, with his daughter, with the first Imam, and how it happened. Not that it's swept under the rug, for us to know how it happened. And of course, there are times and places for this, but at least for us to bring in at least some facts, not disputable claims, but facts that we can consider when we come to understand the end of the life of the Prophet and what happened on this day, 1,400 years ago. So I'll begin after Salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Wa ali Muhammad wa ajal farajah. In the year of the elephant, over 500 years after the time of Nabi Isa alayhi salam, Rasulullah is born. And the coming of Rasulullah was actually foretold. For many years, people had been waiting for a prophet to come. And the Jews had migrated to the Arabian Peninsula because it was part of their prophecy that a prophet was coming to this land, except they believed him to be Jewish. Tribes from all over Arabia believed that the prophet that was coming was supposed to be coming from their own tribe. Some of the chiefs of Quraysh especially believed themselves to perhaps be that prophet. So there was knowledge of one who was coming, most notably by the ancestors of the prophet himself. We see Abdul Muttalib in his life story, how many times he refers to the divine grace of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that he was a monotheist. And we see, according to some schools of thought, that the ancestors of the Prophet are not monotheists, they're apparently polytheists. Now, the reasons behind these different conflicting ahadith is a whole different subject, and if you want to know more about that, you can check out the Prophet Mohammad series. However, tonight's program will be me just stating what we believe. And what we believe is that the ancestors of the Prophet were all monotheists. His grandfather was a monotheist. His father, Abdullah, was a monotheist. And of course, his father passed away before he was born. And now this baby is in the womb of his mother. And as he comes into the world, his mother has a vision. Sayyidah Amina has a vision about this baby and the name by which she would call this baby. And it was the name Muhammad. A name which was not given to any Arab before then. It was a unique name. People were surprised by this name. And when the baby is born, there are signs and miracles happening all over the skies, all over Arabia. And people see this, and many people knew that he had come. Abdul Muttalib knew this was the baby. And he takes the baby. And he takes it to the Kaaba, still an infant, raises it up and says, Allahumma sqina bihaqqi hadha al-ghulam. Oh Allah, quench our thirsts by the right of this child. And the drought that was in Mecca at the time, because they had been going through a drought for several months, ended right then and there with the blessing of the birth of the Prophet. The first miracle in the life of the Prophet was when he was born. And people knew around the Bani Hashim, people knew this was a special child. It was known. It wasn't something that was hidden. In fact, Abu Talib, the one who they say is also a polytheist and that he died a polytheist, even though he was the sanad, the backbone of the Prophet for the Prophet's entire life in Mecca. Abu Talib, when his wife Fatima bint Asad, the mother of Imam Ali alayhi salam, when Fatima came to Abu Talib and told him congratulations on the birth of this new baby, this miracle baby, Abu Talib in our reports replies to her, Usburi alayya sabtan atiki bimithlih. He says, be patient with me for 30 years. Sabtan. Be patient with me for 3 decades and I will bring you one like him. So not only did Abu Talib know that Rasulullah was coming, he also knows someone like him was coming in 30 years. Of course, we know that to be Amir al-Mu'mineen Ali alayhi salam, and there is wisdom behind him coming 30 years later. So when the Prophet is 40, the mission begins. Imam Ali is of a mature age at 10 years old. And Imam Ali alayhi salam describes his relationship with the Prophet from the very beginning. He says, I was like the baby camel in between the mother camel's legs. Wherever he went, I went. He would chew the food I would eat before giving it to me so that I could easily digest it. So Imam Ali alayhi salam remained with the Prophet everywhere. And he was with him leading up to those times when Rasulullah would go to Ghar Hira. And when Rasulullah was 40 years old, and Jibreel descended and told him to begin the mission on the 27th of Rajab. He didn't say Iqra. He didn't say read. And the Prophet says, I don't know how to read. That didn't happen on 27th of Rajab. That's when the Quran came down. The Quran comes down in Shahru Ramadan. Shahru Ramadan alladhi unzila fihi al-Quran. Right? So we believe that the Quran comes down in Shahr Ramadan and it comes down in different ways. But on the 27th of Rajab, it wasn't the revelation that was being revealed. It was the mission that was beginning. The Quran actually, according to historical reports, it is revealed about 3 years after the prophethood begins. So the Prophet is 43 when he begins with the Quran. He's 40 years old when the mission begins. And in the beginning, it's a secret mission. And he gathers the believers around him. And of course, the Prophet faces much resistance from the people in the beginning because now he's threatening their livelihoods. The Quraysh who believed they were Ahlullah, believed that they are the tribe of God, the sons of Ismail. And now a man is coming who is saying that everyone here is equal and there is no preference for a white man over a black man, or an Arab over a non-Arab, or a rich man over a poor man, or a slave over a master, or a master over a slave. He says, Akramakum andallahi atqakum. The most noble of you are the most God conscious of you. And this is destruction for the Quraysh because this destroys their whole economic empire. And it destroys their status and reputation amongst the Arabs and the treaties. They were the kings of the peninsula. So they were all warring him. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, throughout the life of the Prophet, he kept giving Rasulullah these gifts again and again. Throughout all the difficulties, so the Prophet could have this rest amongst all the hardship. And perhaps the greatest gift and the greatest journey was during the Mi'raj. And the beauty of the Isra or Mi'raj journey is that it's in the Quran. It's a miracle story, but it's in the Quran. So it's not something that's from the ahadith that people have to say, this doesn't seem right because it doesn't fit my logic. This is a miracle from the Quran. Well, Rasulullah is in Mecca and he is taken by a winged creature, a horse-like creature, from Mecca to modern day Palestine, to Bayt al-Maqdis in one night, and brings it back. He brings Rasulullah back, this creature. And this is called the Isra. As for the Mi'raj, it occurs whilst Rasulullah is there in Palestine. However, this is not a journey that occurs in dunya. This is a journey that pierces through realms. Okay? It pierces through realms. Rasulullah enters into the higher realms, the higher dimensions, not in dunya anymore. Rasulullah, whilst he was in dunya, he was given the gift to pierce through and go to these other realms. And there he meets the angel of death for the first time. There he meets all the creatures, all these different angels, and Jibreel is touring him around. He takes him to the pond of Kawthar where he does ghusl in the pond of Kawthar, and then he gives him a fruit. And he takes this fruit and Jibreel says, Ya Rasulullah, eat from this fruit and spend the night with your wife Khadija. So Rasulullah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he takes this fruit from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the fruit of heaven. Jibreel gives it to him and he eats from this fruit and he goes on. Jibreel then begins to take him to different prophets and he introduces him to Yusuf, to Yunus, to Idris. He introduces him to Moses and to Jesus. He introduces him to prophet by prophet. Rasulullah goes and says his salam and greetings to all of them, and finally takes him to the higher realm where he meets Nabi Ibrahim alayhi salam, his great-great-grandfather. And he sends his salutations upon Ibrahim. And then they reach a stage where Jibreel says he cannot go on anymore. Rasulullah looks at Jibreel, and Jibreel's face and temperament all begin to change. And he begins to hide his face. And Rasulullah says, what's wrong? And Jibreel tells him, if I go any further, then I will perish. So Rasulullah decides to go on the journey by himself. So he continues to pierce through these realms and dimensions. And the hadith from Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam, by which this narration is reported, the hadith states that Rasulullah begins to pierce through the veils, 500 veils of light piercing through, 500 years between each veil, pierces through them, pierces through space, and pierces through time. Rasulullah says the light that he was seeing became so powerful, he could not look anymore, and he begins to cry as he is journeying, but he says, my heart gazed upon that light. And he continues until he reaches the final place, the final stage, which is known as Sidrat al-Muntaha. And this is the place which is known as where one enters into the presence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He enters into Sidrat al-Muntaha, the presence of Allah. Of course, Allah is not in a place. And this place is not really a physical place, but it's understood as that place where Rasulullah is present before Allah, the closest anyone ever came to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And Allah describes the state of the Prophet when he is in Sidrat al-Muntaha. In the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says about Rasulullah, he says, Dana fatadalla fakana qaba qawsayni aw adna. He says that Rasulullah at this point was so close to Allah, that he was closer than 2 bows' lengths, or even less than that. He was that close to Allah, and he was melting in God. And then he begins to speak to Allah directly. And he says, Ya Allah, you gave Moses the gift of speaking to you, and you gave Abraham the gift of being your friend. What gift do you bestow upon me? So Allah then speaks to Rasulullah directly and says, Ya Rasulullah, Ya Muhammad, Ya Nabi. I gave Moses the gift of speaking to him, and now I give you the gift of speaking to you. And I took Abraham as a friend, and I take you as my friend. But I will give you more than I gave anyone before you, because I will give you the Fatiha. And I will give you this Quran, the greatest miracle, which will remain until the final day. And I will give you the earth, by which you will rule, and your descendants will rule in leadership after you. And at that moment, the Arsh of Allah has 12 lights that begin to glow. 12 lights that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala informs Rasulullah who those lights are that are coming, that are reflections of Rasulullah. As the Imams tell us, Awwaluna Muhammad, wa akhiruna Muhammad, wa kulluna Muhammad, we are all Muhammad. And he tells him the final light has your name, Muhammad. And he is known as the Mahdi. And he is the one that will come and complete the mission and fill the earth with justice after it's filled with oppression and tyranny. And at this moment, he says, Ya Muhammad, Ana al-Mahmud wa anta Muhammad. Shaqaqtu ismaka min ismi. He says, I am the praised one, and you are Muhammad, also the praised one. And you have taken your name from my name. I have made our names join, so that whenever I am praised, you are praised. And whenever I am glorified, you are glorified. So our names can never separate. And here Rasulullah then is given this gift of Mi'raj. He comes back. He goes back to Mecca. The Buraq takes him to Mecca. He's 45 years old now. This was 5 years after the prophethood, for those of you wondering. And that night, he spends it with Sayyidah Khadija alayhi salam. And 9 months later, Sayyidah Fatima alayhi salam is born. And so she is born from that fruit of paradise. That's why Sayyidah Fatima alayhi salam, she's not understood to be from this world. And that's why when Rasulullah would miss the paradise and miss heaven, he would go and embrace Fatima and smell her hair and kiss her hands. He wasn't doing that just because he was a normal father that loved his normal daughter. It was because he was a man that saw the higher dimensions and then saw it embodied in this person that came from the fruits of paradise, this mystery of a human being, Fatima alayhi salam. Now, Rasulullah is given these gifts, but the resistance continues. The Muslims are very few in number, and they are killed and massacred. They are killed in the most gruesome ways in front of Rasulullah. Ammar's parents, Ammar ibn Yasir and Sumayya, they are torn, their bodies and limbs are torn by horses in front of the Prophet. The Prophet's followers are being killed. Bilal, the Muslim slave, at that time, they would place rocks on his body to torture him. The Muslims had to flee Mecca and go to Ethiopia. Then they were exiled into what was known as the valley and gorge of Abu Talib, where they were hungry. For years they were out there. Screams of children, and many died because of the starvation at that time. Rasulullah witnessed all of this, had to go through all of this at a time when Sayyidah Khadija alayhi salam gave all of her wealth and Abu Talib did all he could to support the Prophet. And then after 10 years of him trying to spread Islam, and these people, they say, when Rasulullah is trying to speak about Islam to the people, whenever visitors would come into Mecca, they would say, put your fingers in your ears. He is a sorcerer, he is a majnoon, he is crazy, he is. And one of the most difficult things for anyone to go through is when people mock your intellect, when people mock your intelligence, when they insult your intelligence. And this was khairu khalqillah, Rasulullah, the greatest of Allah's creation, and he was being mocked as a crazy person, as an insane person, as a majnoon, as a sorcerer, as a wizard. So Rasulullah, when after a decade the time approached for Sayyidah Khadija alayhi salam to leave this world, and Abu Talib left this world, and it was known as Aam al-Huzn, the year of sorrow, and he left all his support was no longer around. The Prophet decides that it's time to leave Mecca and try somewhere else. He's been trying for a whole decade, and the Muslims are not increasing. It's only a couple hundred, and they all had to flee and be exiled and killed. So he decides to go to a nearby place known as Ta'if. For those of you who have been to Hajj, you will know that Ta'if is quite a car ride away. And of course, at that time, they went on foot, on camel and on foot. So it took them a few days. Rasulullah went with only 2 people, Zayd ibn Harith and Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam. And they leave, they go on this far journey of 3-4 days to get to the town of Ta'if. And they climb this mountainous journey. And when they get to the town, Rasulullah begins to tell the people about Islam and try to bring them towards Islam. He tells them, there is only one God, not these asnam. and there is a heaven, there is a hell, and you will be recompensed for your actions. And don't oppress the orphan, and don't oppress the woman, and don't take from the poor, and help and assist. And people would literally, the chiefs of the tribe. So imagine this welcome. Imagine you going somewhere to do good for others. Maybe it might take you an hour or two. You're going to help a community. You want to do community service in the masjid, and in the masjid they tell you, listen, we don't need your help. How hurt would you feel? Like, come on, I came all the way here to help you guys. You don't want to accept my help? And you're just helping perhaps to clean. Rasulullah, days it took him to get to this town after he had lost his wife and his uncle. And he is not trying to clean. He's trying to bring them the truth, salvation, the meaning of life. And they literally close the doors in his face and they say, we don't want to hear any of it. Until they send a delegation to him and they tell him, we don't want you here in our town. Leave our town. And so the Prophet decides that he was going to leave the town. He tells Imam Ali and he tells Zayd, let's leave. And as they leave the town, the kids of Ta'if, they line up. So the people of Ta'if, they line their children up on the way out of Ta'if. And they all begin to hold these rocks. And they begin to stone Imam Ali alayhi salam, Zayd, and your Prophet Rasulullah. And they throw the stones towards them to the point where Rasulullah, imagine, has to start walking faster. And Zayd and Ali try to get in the way of the stones and they become wounded. And the one who bleeds the most is the Prophet. As the blood, the hadith say, it trickles down into his sandals. And there is so much blood that the blood became dry and the sandals became sticky to remove. Rasulullah was trying to bring Ali and Zayd and not let them fight back. He just wants to leave. Just to leave. Imagine years and years and years of this tabligh, of hard work. And Rasulullah's heart would hurt him because he wants to guide, he cares about the people. And they took him. Rasulullah then leaves Ta'if. Now that he's free of the stones, he sees a tree. And in this time of utter hardship, desperation, and loneliness, where he's lost his beloveds, and he's been trying his best with his mission, and he's just not seeing an answer or a light at the end of the tunnel, he goes and sits under this tree, and he sits down to speak to Allah in desperation. And he says some of the most beautiful words in our tradition. And these words are those recited by Imam al-Hussain alayhi salam in Karbala, before Karbala in Dua Arafah. So it's amazing how Imam al-Hussain inherited the words of his grandfather in those times of desperation. When he recited Dua Arafah before Karbala, Rasulullah sits down under the tree. He looks to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and he says, Ilahi ila man takiluni. He says, my Lord, to who will you entrust me to? Who are you going to give me to? He speaks like a baby, a helpless baby that's being moved from arm to arm, from hand to hand. He says, Ilahi, who are you giving me to? Ila man takiluni. Ila qaribin fayaqta'uni. Are you going to give me to someone who seems close to me but is going to cut me off? Because he's already lost Abu Talib, he lost Khadija. You can't have hope in anyone around you because ultimately we're all going to leave each other through death. We can't help it. He says, are you going to give me to someone who's close to me but will cut me off? Am ila ba'idin yatajahamuni. Or to someone who is far from me but hurts me, is like fire towards me, like these people around us that keep hurting us with their words, with their actions, no matter how good our intentions are. He says, Ya Allah, if this is happening because you are angry at me, then I can't handle this. If all this bala and hardship is a punishment, then I'm not okay with that. But if you're pleased with me, then I don't mind how much hardship I go through. As long as you're pleased, Ya Allah, la ubali, فَإِلَى غَيْرِكَ لَا تَكِلْنِي. Do not entrust me to anyone except you. Don't give me away to anyone except me. Keep me with you. Ya Allah, don't leave me. Don't leave me. You know when you are in true desperation? That's how you speak to Allah. You say, Ya Allah, don't leave me. Because I'm not leaving you. And when you speak to Allah like this, and it's the same way that Imam Hussain alayhi salam spoke to Allah, then you realize that the Imams taught us a true language of love. And that's why he's known as Habibullah, the beloved of Allah. You see, Ibrahim is Khalilullah, Isa is Ruhullah, Musa is Kalimullah, Rasulullah is Habibullah. And that's why he says, In kuntum tuhibbun Allah fattabi'uni yuhbibkum Allah. If you claim to love Allah, then follow me and Allah will love you. It's all love. Rasulullah is able to push through these hardships with love. And he pushes through. And he is able to get to a stage where he leaves to go towards Medina, and he fights through all the times when they tried to kill him and his followers, Badr, Uhud, Khandaq. And he gets to the Fatih of Mecca, the conquest of Mecca, the penultimate moment, where he's going to go in now. And now he can take revenge against everyone who did this to him after they tried to kill him so many times. And he saw his followers being massacred, and he saw Hamza's liver being eaten, and he saw. Now, when he can finally take revenge, Abu Sufyan is right in front of him and has surrendered. And all the people of Quraysh have surrendered. Rasulullah pardons everyone. Aside from a few skirmishes, Rasulullah ensures that no conflict takes place in Mecca. He does not harm. The ones who would have been punished are exiled, not to return, but they're not killed. And the ones in Mecca become Muslim. So much so that Rasulullah, even the next war in Hunayn, the war booty, he gives it to the Quraysh. But this is an important point in Islamic history. Why? The conquest of Mecca is very important, because if the conquest of Mecca did not happen, then Amir al-Mu'mineen Ali alayhi salam would have been the Khalifa without much of a problem. When the conquest of Mecca happens and the Quraysh enter into Islam by word only, they just say it, they haven't become Muslim. What happens is you have to look at the different factions within the Islamic Ummah. And now we're getting to this understanding of what occurred and the final moments of the Prophet's life and how did it happen. You had, in the Islamic Ummah, you had several different groups. You had a group which was perhaps the weakest group, which was known as Hizb Ali or Shi'at Ali. They were the group of really the slaves or the outcasts. They were the ones who were not from any tribe, had no backing. And the reason why they were followers of Imam Ali alayhi salam, because he was a man of equality. So you had Ammar from here, you had Bilal from here, you had Salman from here, you had Miqdad from here, you had Abu Dhar from here. However, the strongest faction were the Ansar. The Ansar were the people that were in Medina, that awaited Rasulullah. The second strongest were the Muhajirin. They were from Quraysh. So if I'm throwing around too many names here, then you need to know more about the life of the Prophet. And I would really suggest you watch the 10-part series on YouTube. It's on my account under my name, and it's right there. And I explain all these different factions and all of their names and what they're made out of. So the Muhajirin are those who left Mecca with the Prophet in the early days, in the difficult days. However, they were few in number. When the Quraysh entered into Islam after the conquest of Mecca, the Muhajirin are reunited with their old family members because they're from Quraysh as well. And now they have backing. And now Quraysh have backing from people who were there from the very beginning. And then within Islam, now you had Arabs from all over Arabia that used to have a treaty with Quraysh. When Quraysh entered into Islam, now this treaty is reborn. So what happens is, as the Prophet approached his death, yes, Ghadir happened. So many things happened clearly. And Ghadir was not the first time. Ghadir was the last time. There were various times when Rasulullah said Ali was going to be the rightful leader. It's not a controversy, guys. There's no controversy. Everyone admits Ali should have been the rightful leader. The first and second Khalifa themselves admit that. But what happened is, as Rasulullah is at his final moments, and Rasulullah said, approaching his death, he said that I see rebellion sparking off in the dark night. And he tried to get rid of everyone in the city. He said, everyone go with Osama, a 17-year-old man, Jaysh Osama, the army of Osama, go out for a battle. And he included everyone that was going to be a part of the upcoming fitna. And none of them went. And Rasulullah said, لَعَنَ اللَّهَ مَنْ تَخَلَّفَ عَنْ جَيْشِ Osama. May God's curse be upon the one who does not go. He didn't go. Just before he died, a few days before he died, he asked for a pen and something to write on. In order to leave something behind, he said, I will leave you behind advice. If you follow it, you will never go astray after me. Something very important. As that was happening, one of the companions said, no, Inna Nabiyya la yahjur. Inna Nabi la yahjur. The Prophet is delirious. We have the Kitab of Allah. Kitabullah is sufficient for us. Imagine the audacity of this so-called companion who says this about the Prophet in his final moments. He says the Prophet is delirious. The day came on the 28th of Safar. Sayyidah Fatima alayhi salam is crying by the side of Rasulullah. And the Prophet tells her to come close, and he speaks to her. And he tells her she'd be the first one to follow him. So she stops crying. Then he says, call my brother. So she calls Imam Ali alayhi salam. He sits by his side. He takes Rasulullah into his arms. And Rasulullah speaks to Ali and tells him, Ya Ali, you will be the one to perform the ghusl on me. No one else can see my body. And at that moment, the angel of death descends and comes to speak and ask permission from Rasulullah to take his soul. Never before had it asked permission. But it's narrated to us from Imam Sajjad alayhi salam that the angel of death asks Rasulullah, do you want to stay? And Rasulullah replies, no. Take me to the divine companion. And at that moment, he breathes his last breath, saying, As-salat, as-salat, al-aytam, al-aytam. Prayer and orphans. Those were the last two thoughts on his mind. And he breathed his last breath, and Imam Ali alayhi salam's tears strolled down his eyes, and he begins to do the ghusl on Rasulullah. And he tells him, Ya Rasulullah, I loved you more than I loved my mother and my father. But death is a haqq, promised to all of us. So Imam Ali will be patient through this bala as he is burying the Prophet Muhammad. At the same time, the community of the Prophet Muhammad were gathered in a place called Saqifa. And they were debating amongst each other who was going to lead Islam afterwards. And now you had the Ansar who, upon haqq in the beginning, because they knew Ali was going to be the leader, but when they realized the Quraysh had their own plans, were not going to allow Ali to be the leader of Islam for obvious reasons. He doesn't rule by a Qurayshi mindset, and he is just too disastrous for Quraysh. The Ansar decide to take it for themselves. So they fall into a debate with them. And the Qurayshis come. And these few members from Quraysh, they begin to tell them, who are you? Who are you to come and take from us and challenge us for Sultan Muhammad, Sultan Muhammad? All right? The royal chair. وَنَحْنُ قَوْمُهُ وَعَشِيرَتُهُ. And we are his people and we are his tribe. So you see, Jahiliyyah came back. Tribal tendencies came back. Nepotism came back. 20 years of work being undone this morning. There is a lot of detail to speak about Saqifa. It needs its own session. But when they begin to have this argument, the Quraysh ends up being the one who is able to be victorious against the Ansar by conquering the Ansar into different factions themselves, because they were made up of Aus and Khazraj. Then they elect the first Khalifa and they begin to force people to give the bay'ah. In the streets, people are being forced. And this is not a Shi'i narrative, this is agreed upon. Now, they want the one ultimate bay'ah from the man who was supposed to be the leader. They want it from him. And they can't use the same excuse. They can't say we are the tribe of the Prophet and we are the family of the Prophet, because he's the family of the Prophet. So what do they say? They say it's true that Ali should have been the leader, but there was a fitna. There was a fitna. A fitna occurred. And because the fitna occurred, just like tayammum, just like when you want to pray and you don't have water, you do tayammum, right? And the prayer is legitimate. They say, well, this is basically like tayammum. The bay'ah happened because it was a time of urgency. We couldn't allow fitna to happen, so then now we elected the Khalifa. So now you have to just give the bay'ah. Imam Ali alayhi salam did not accept. Imam Ali asked for 40 men so he can fight against them. And this was a whole tribe now. It wasn't 3-4 people. This was hundreds and hundreds to thousands of people that were now upon this movement. And they were not about to allow Ali ibn Abi Talib to take this opportunity from them. Because if the Quraysh had let go, they would not have ruled Islam for the next 600-700 years as they did through the Umayyads and the Abbasids. Quraysh ruled Islam. They were not going to let him. So Ali asks for 40 men to fight with him. He says, 40 men, meet me tomorrow in the morning with shaved heads. Only 5 came. 5. The same 5 we always see. And they are 5 that if they are killed, no one cares because they have no strong tribe behind them. The Quraysh and their alliance with all the other Arab tribes that was reborn, and now the Ansar were being forced, people all over being forced. And then they decide they will force the bay'ah of Ali, so they come to the house of Ali. Imagine this is happening the day after the Prophet's death. Allahu Akbar. This is not even from the Shia hadiths, my brothers and sisters. So you don't think, this is just facts. This is just facts. I'll tell you one, the Shia hadith begins. This is so far agreed upon. They come to the house and they demand that Ali comes out. And Ali does not come out. So they say, we'll enter the house, and someone calls out, the daughter of Rasulullah is in the house. And this man calls out, wa'idh. And then the hadiths from the other schools of thought ends. After the man says, wa'idh, so what? So what if the daughter of Rasulullah is in the house? Now I ask you, is it a cliffhanger? Does it just stop? Does everyone just go home? No, they enter the house. In our traditions, it tells us what happens when they enter the house. And for anyone who says, how could Ali allow for someone to enter the house and harm his family? Let me explain to you something. You know the house of Ali ibn Abi Talib? It has 2 doors. It has a front door and it has a back door. And the back door is Bab Ali. It's the door of Ali. Why? That's the door that was connected to the masjid. Do you remember when Rasulullah said, Siddul abwab illa babah, close all the doors except the door of Ali? That's Ali's door. And that's where he was with the companions, with his 4-5 friends that were inside. Salman was there, Ammar was there, by some accounts, even Zubayr was there. And that's a whole different story. At the front though, the front of the house is the door that Rasulullah would go to knock on to enter the house. He wouldn't come through the back door. When he wants to see his grandsons Hassan or Hussein, he'll go out to Bab Fatima and knock on the door of Fatima. The door where Fatima was, that was her door. When they entered into the house, and this is a small house, she's the one behind that door. And they slammed the door on Sayyidah Fatima alayhi salam. And Ali gets up and charges at them. And like I said, there are hundreds, up to 1,000 of them outside. They storm into the house. As they're grabbing Ali and he's grabbing them, they grab all the companions. Now they're inside the house. Ali looks around. He sees swords on the throats of all of his companions, ready to be slit. They grab him. They're waiting for him to make a mistake. Imam Ali alayhi salam, his mission now is to stay alive. If you want to say Ali is the hero of Khaybar, of Uhud, I will tell you that Ali is a man. Like Abu Fadl Abbas is a man. Imam Ali alayhi salam in Badr killed 35 men, not 35,000. He's still a physical human being that holds one sword and has two arms. He will destroy tens of them, but he isn't going to kill thousands of them in that one night. He's not going to. He said, I want 40 men. He only had 5, so he didn't rise up. If Imam Ali alayhi salam took his sword out, which is what they were waiting for, Imam Ali saw them around him. They were waiting. These people were edgy. These people were waiting. Everyone right now, at the slip, the slightest slip, there would be bloodshed. A'udhu billah, if Imam Ali even took his sword out, Sayyidah Fatima would have stopped him and said, what are you doing? You have to save Islam right now. Islam's still a baby. It's the second day after the Prophet's death. If you leave, Ya Ali, what happens? Look what happened to Islam with you there. With you there, Karbala still happened. What would have happened if you weren't there? The story of Imam Ali alayhi salam is very difficult to digest unless you go through a detailed understanding of history. He's taken outside of the house. He is forced to go. He does not open his fist. They touch his hand and they claim that he gave bay'ah. And we see the years to come, everything that occurred afterwards began on this night. Karbala, Imam al-Hussein, the one who Rasulullah said, Hussein minni wa ana min Hussein. Imam al-Hussein, when he is in Karbala and he tells the people, don't you know who I am? Don't you know who my father is? They say, yes, we know who your father is. And that's why we're doing this. When Yazid is given the head of Abu Abdullah alayhi salam in the palace, and he pokes his stick at the lips of Imam al-Hussein in front of Sayyidah Zainab, he begins to recite poetry for his grandfathers in Badr. You know who was killed in Badr? The grandfather of Muawiyah, the father of Hind, the grandfathers of Yazid. They say we gain revenge now. This is revenge against Ali and Muhammad by killing Hussein. Imam al-Hussein had to pay the price for the victories of his grandfather. That's why Hussein minni wa ana min Hussein. But Imam al-Hussein could rise up in Karbala at that time after Islam had been nurtured, because it was the 60th year after the Hijrah. But when this happened to Ali, Karbala would have happened way before. Karbala was going to happen in Medina on that night if Ali had made any wrong move. Ali's mission that night was to stay alive through the night. And perhaps we can discuss in more detail in other sessions what occurred afterwards. But for this session, we'll have to call it a day now because we're running out of time. And I wanted to open the floor for question and answers so people can ask. I'm sure that people have some questions to ask about what I've discussed. And then we will end with a few minutes of a musibah. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa alihi at-tayyibin at-tahirin.
Do you want to do the question and answer first? And
yes.
Musibah or Musibah and then?
No,
okay.
we'll do Q&A because after Musibah, we won't be able to continue.
Correct. Okay, so they've asked me to say before, so everybody feel free to start submitting your questions.
Yeah.
I wasn't planning on doing Q&A with
I know.
red eyes.
I'm sorry.
I guess that's what we're going to be doing.
Yeah.
So I guess while we wait for the questions to come in, feel free to ask them on Instagram, on Facebook, on Zoom. We have people who are collecting the questions, sending it to me for me to ask. So while we wait for the questions to start pouring in, please don't forget to follow McMaster AhlulBayt Islamic Society and Imam Mahdi Youth on their social media pages. That inshallah, with your support, we'll have more events in the future. Well, they've asked me to put on my Zoom.
Mahdi.
Yes.
Can I just, 1 second, let me just, can I stop this and then start it again because it's going to stop in a minute on its own?
Okay, yeah, for sure. No worries. So
yeah?
I'll
okay, so I'm going to start it again. You come in and then I'm going to invite you again.
Inshallah.
Okay, so everyone, if you want to continue with us, please come back up. Yeah, assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Okay, so we're back on Zoom. So inshallah, we're going to be continuing with the question and answer with Sayed Makke. We're just waiting for the Instagram to come up, and then we're gonna start asking the questions one by one. Thank you for your patience, everyone. We're just waiting for the Sayed to start the Instagram live, and we'll start with the questions afterwards. Okay, seems like we're back.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone.
Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum salam wa rahmatullah.
Okay, perfect. So let's begin with the questions. So question number one, this was regarding Mi'raj. A brother asked a while back when you were speaking about that.
Sure.
He said, the stories and narrations mentioned by the Sayyid, what's the source? So I'm guessing it's written about the Mi'raj. And then he said, and what books to read to get further knowledge?
Okay, so when it comes to the Mi'raj, there are so many ahadith about the Mi'raj. So you'll find various different versions of the ahadith on the Mi'raj. And I only mentioned one version mixed with a few others. But the version that I was mentioning is a famous one that is a very long one that is narrated by Imam Sadiq alayhi salam. So it's known as Imam Sadiq's narration of the Mi'raj. And you can easily find it in English even on alislam.org. You can find it there with the hadiths all there in English. However, of course, there's also this a really great book written by Sayed Hussain Makke on the life of Prophet Muhammad. It's a small book. It's only about 100 pages. And the chapter on Mi'raj is really beautiful because he goes into like the green cloth that the Prophet uses and everything else, and he bases on from some other ahadith. There are various different ahadith that would shock some people, when it comes to that journey of Mi'raj. Of course, the Mi'raj is one that's agreed upon by all Muslims from all schools of thought. But the version that I was narrating was from Imam Sadiq alayhi salam. It's the AhlulBayt's belief. So of course, not all the different versions will believe in the 12 lights on the throne of Allah. But that's the version of Imam Sadiq's narration, and that's the one that I narrated. So that would be the narration that you'd look for.
Thanks. And I think the sister asked over here, salams, no, not this one. Do the questions have to be related to the death of the Prophet, or can we ask any questions? So inshallah, the questions have to be regarding the event itself.
I would like it to be, yeah.
Yes, no marriage questions or...
I mean, maybe I can do it like a Q&A later on, like just on a random night we'll do that. But inshallah. The title of the book for someone who just answered is Muhammad, Man of God. And Ammar al-Nashid, my beloved, has just commented a flower, so I'll give you a flower as well. Mawla Ammar, Habib Alvi.
So nobody asked this question, but I'm sure it's on the minds of many people. You mentioned at the very beginning that many people in the West who don't speak Arabic or Farsi, that there's a lot of books about the Holy Prophet and his life and seerah. Us living in the West, we don't have the privilege of accessing those books some of the times. What are some English books that you would recommend youth to go to for learning about the Prophet?
Look, I'll be honest. I haven't come across a book that I would personally recommend yet. So, I mean, I would only recommend you a book out of like, because there's no other choice. However, I have seen recently they translated, I think Sayyid Ali al-Musawi, I believe he was part of a translation for one of the traditional historic books on the life of the Prophet, and that seems to have done very well. I haven't actually read that, so I don't know how it's doing, but of course it's written by a great alim, so I'm sure from the Shia perspective that's going to be beneficial. You also have Sheikh Ja'far Subhani's The Prophet, that's online, written in English. However, at the same time, again, I say that I don't personally like these translated books. I don't know about that one, Sayyid Ali Musawi's one that he was part of, but the Prophet one, or The Message, I believe it's called, one of them. I don't like the translations of Ansarian just because they don't really, I don't find them too engaging. So if they're going to be translated, hopefully they're translated by academic sources that can truly bring it into smooth English. As for one written in the English language from the Shi'i narrative, there's great taqsir and it hasn't been done yet. And I know that, I believe Sheikh Rizwan Arustu, a few years ago, I saw him, he was working on something like that. So hopefully he's close to releasing that, something like God's Emissaries, which would be amazing, based on hadith and everything else. Personally, I'm hoping to contribute myself, but I just need a bit of time to be able to contribute this. And I believe that in the next 5 years, we'll have a lot more literature written originally in the English language. However, I would say if you really want to get into the history of the Prophet based on traditional sources, it's very hard to do so without the Arabic, because everything is in Arabic. And there's a plethora of resources in Arabic, but they're just in Arabic, unfortunately. So we're starting, we're doing it slowly. So as I mentioned, the series, the 10-part series, you can begin there, because I don't know if someone else has done that yet. But so that's a seerah from our narrative that you can check that out, and hopefully there are others who have. I think there are maybe 1 or 2 other series on the life of the Prophet from the Shi'i narrative online on YouTube. So check those out. At least begin with lectures, perhaps, and those books to get you by until we're able to bring you like proper academic literature, which I think is very close in the next couple of years, inshallah.
So, yeah, your series that you did in Ramadan, I believe it was on the left.
That's the one.
That's a very good one for people to
start. I think that will help a lot of people initially. Like if you want to know more about the Prophet, watch that series, and then from there you can use it as a base to go into everything else. Because although it's only 10 parts, it will give you just the points that you need to research and the different conflicting narrations and things like this. So hopefully people can check that out.
Inshallah. So the next question we have is, are there any books that go into depth regarding Saqifa?
Books that go into depth? Yeah. I've got them right in front of me. Again, they're in Arabic, but there's a lot that goes into depth about Saqifa, and it goes into a lot of depth, and there's a whole plan of how Saqifa happened before and after and everything else. It's written. Sayyid Ja'far Murtada is someone that you'd really want to search up. He's just very impressive, very, very impressive historian. If you are an Arabic reader and you want to know more, he's got all his material online. So Sayyid Ja'far Murtada is the way to go. Of course, my teacher, Sheikh Qasim Yassin, also has his books that I use. And I am, inshallah, for Shahr Ramadan. So last year was Prophet Mohammad series. Next year is Imam Ali series. So I'm continuing from the death of the Prophet to the death of Imam Ali, 10 parts. So then we'd get the second stage. So the first lecture or 2 will be in depth about Saqifa to the best of my ability, whilst not causing too much controversy.
Inshallah. As for the next question we have over here, this was asked on Instagram. How do we strike the balance of fostering Islamic unity while also preparing our beliefs?
Yes. So, for example, a lecture like this, right, I believe is important because these are part of our beliefs. However, if you notice in my lecture, I had 0 name calling. I didn't curse anyone. I didn't belittle a name or a companion or whatever else. I said, I have respect for a symbol of another person, a religious symbol of another person. I won't disrespect that person for him. Then that way I am prioritizing unity. However, I don't have to love this person. I don't have to like this person. I don't have to believe that they're a companion. I believe that they were unjust and they were an oppressor. But that's my belief. And you don't have to believe that either. You can believe what you want to believe. So we can agree there, and I won't offend you, but I have my own beliefs, and I encourage people to look into their beliefs without having to be provocative. There's no reason for us to take this. When you're young and you learn about Saqifa and you learn about AhlulBayt and oppression, you just want to fight everyone. And that's not what the AhlulBayt want. That's not what they want. But you should know about it so you can learn. So you can see right now what's happening in the world. When you can see the elections coming up and you see the liars and you see people, how they're taking leadership, and you see governments and you see, this is the sunnah of life, of civilizations, and they repeat themselves again and again. Not for us to just simply believe the mainstream in everything and understand it when it's happened in our tradition. in our tradition. So to learn from the history of Rasulullah and learn from the history of Imam Ali alayhi salam and relive it, and at the end of the day, these are our beloveds. So we would want to educate ourselves on their lives and commit our lives to seeking their knowledge so we may follow their example.
Ahsant. So we have more questions.
I just want to answer the name of the book. For the name of the book, Shaykh Qadim Yasin has a book called Khatamul Anbiya. As for Sayyid Ja'far Murtada, he has Mawsu'at, he says, I believe it's called Tarikh al-Nubuwah. But you can find a plethora of resources from Sayyid Ja'far Murtada on his website, and his whole Mawsu'ah is there. So just putting that there, and then we continue.
Okay. Perfect. Thank you very much for that. Over here, Sister Zainab Hamka, salam, wa alaikum salam. What about in Arabic? At least one of the books that we can read.
Just answered her. That's the one.
I blanked. My apologies for that. Over here, we have a question. What was the cause? This was asked multiple times. What was the cause of death of the Holy Prophets? Was it being poisoned, or was it a natural death?
Yeah. So we are told that by the Prophet and by the Imams that not one of them will die without being a shaheed. So there is a wide belief that Rasulullah was killed and that he died a shaheed. And this seems very likely, especially when you see the build-up towards his death of the people that were conspiring around him. It's most likely that he wasn't killed by a Jewish woman trying to poison him. It seems as though there are suggestions and a hadith that would suggest that some people around him attempted to poison him, and that they were perhaps successful in making him sick. As for the proof of that and proving who did it, that's a whole different discussion. But it seems as though he was poisoned by some people around him, just like Imam al-Hasan alayhi salam was poisoned by those close to him.
Ahsant. We have a lot of questions which aren't directly related to the topic of tonight, so I'm going to try to leave those for the end if there is time. We have another question. Well, this is a quick question, I guess. How old was Sayyidah Fatima alayhi salam at the death of her father? And what were the ages of her children?
Sayyidah Fatima alayhi salam at that time was about 18 years old. Her children, Imam al-Hasan alayhi salam, would have been between 7 and 8 years old. Just hitting 8 years old. Imam al-Hussain would have been around 7 years old. She was married when she was 10 years old. In case someone's like thinking, how did this all happen? Imam Ali alayhi salam married Sayyidah Fatima alayhi salam when she was 10 years old. That's what the hadith say. In Al-Kafi, Sayyidah Fatima was 10 years old, and this was a very normal thing at that time. So you guys don't think that, how the hell did this happen? This was very normal in those days. A woman became a woman much earlier than a woman now. It's not like a 10-year-old woman over here. A 10-year-old girl who's still a baby. Like, no one would allow her to get married now, of course. But in the Arabian Peninsula, at that time, the way women were brought up, they were expected to have a house from very early, and their bodies were built differently in the desert that they were living in the Arabian Peninsula. Not to mention that even in Europe and the Americas, this was a normal occurrence. And royal family, King Edward and Queen Eleanor and the different royals would be married at 12 years old and 13 years old. Romeo and Juliet, everyone's favorite love story. How old were they? They were like 13-year-old kids. So this was a very normal thing at that time. And those who hate Rasulullah himself, even up till the 30s, you'll find Orientalists, when they write about the Prophet, they would never bring up him marrying a young woman because it wasn't something that was a shame at that time for them to bring it up. It's only now understood, we, of course, right now, someone marrying a young kid, we see that as child abuse or pedophilia or whatever else. We don't condone that. So no one take words and put them in my mouth. Astaghfirullah. We don't condone it. Child marriage or anything else, we do not condone that. However, 1,400 years ago, women and men had different understandings of who they were in society, and their roles and their bodies were different. And you see that here in this time right now, based on how people eat. When I was in Pakistan, I went to Pakistan last year, and I realized they don't eat much protein. They have a lot of carbs, right? So I find my Pakistani friends in London, they're all massive, mashallah, and they go, they're the biggest guys I know. And then when I was in Pakistan, they were all very slim, not much muscle on their bodies, right? But you can tell they're energetic people, but they weren't people who ate a lot of meat, right? And you can see the differences in their bodies. In Lebanon, the breakfast, the delicacy is raw meat for breakfast. That's what we eat in Lebanon, literally. It's raw meat. It's really nice, called kibbenayeh.
Ya Allah.
Yeah, people think it's weird, but it's beautiful, right? And then you can see Lebanese people, the way they're built is always like these really like kind of, and this is just food, like how we are right now. Imagine through hundreds and hundreds of years of different climates and foods, and society was different. So I know people are going to be very, very surprised by that, but that's the age. Oh, look, someone just researched Shakespeare. Shakespeare cuts 3 years off Juliet's age to make her attend the age of 13. Yes, this was the case, and it was a normal thing at the time. So it's not that Shakespeare was perverted. This was normal at the time. 13, 12, 11, that was seen as a time of marriage for a girl.
Even nowadays, I mean, what's society acceptable is changing almost every 5 years. So let alone 1,000 years ago.
Yes, 100%.
Yeah. Okay, so we had another question over here. By the way, for those whose questions I don't ask, I hope you guys don't take it personally. It's only because I'm only asking the ones which are related to the event first. So over here, there's a question. Throughout all the Prophet's endeavors to spread the word of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and to carry out his obligations, the Prophet was routinely mocked, insulted, and abused. However, he always kept his temperament and never retaliated because his responsibility was much bigger than him, and to make it personal. His message was much bigger than himself. How can we improve in that regards? Where, a lot of us, we might, partake in youth group endeavors, efforts, different places here and there. And if people don't acknowledge our efforts, a lot of times we might take it personally. How do we acknowledge that what we're doing is bigger than ourselves?
You acknowledge what you're doing is bigger than yourselves because you acknowledge who you're doing it for. If I'm going to the masjid because I want everyone to see me, I want, the girl I like to see me, I want to make money, or I want leadership, or I want power, and I don't get it, then I'm going to be upset. However, if I'm doing it for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as Rasulullah said, Rasulullah went to Ta'if. He came, sat down by the tree, and he said, Ya Allah, if this is happening because you're angry at me, then I'm not okay with this. But if you're pleased, as long as you're pleased, then I will continue. We do what we do for Allah. If Allah is pleased, that's all we care about. Even if people are not going to be loyal to us and hurt us and don't want us or don't want our help, khair. I tried my best. Ya Allah, please be my witness that I did what I could and they rejected me. And I did what I could. But as long as you do your part, look, this is the normal thing. All of us are going to go. I go through this, man. I go through this. Everyone goes through this. We all go through this. Everyone wants to talk about everyone. Everyone wants to hurt everyone. Unfortunately, in our communities as well, we're supposed to be people of Allah, and we end up being one of the most, hurtful people to each other. We're supposed to be brothers and sisters, and we're so toxic towards each other. Unfortunately, we try to hurt each other, sabotage each other's lives, and it makes zero sense. However, do we stop? We don't stop. No, we continue, and this is the sunnah of the Imams. Let this be the final question. I'll wrap up here so we can begin our Musiba because it's almost midnight where I am.
Inshallah.
But this just piece of advice that I got from my teacher just recently. I was speaking on the phone with my teacher, and he sounded very, his voice was tired. And my teacher is someone who, because I know he exists, I have hope in life. That's how amazing of a human being this person is. That, alhamdulillah, I met someone like that who actually exists, so I know that this thing is real. Okay, like these things I read in the books. Oh, okay, people can actually be like this. I've seen it. So he's like that. So I'm on the phone to him and I'm like, Sheikh, you sound really tired, because he's just going, non-stop. He's helping this community, that person, this marriage, those people, this masjid. And I'm like, Sheikh, you sound really tired. I think you need a break. And he says, Hussain, we don't get breaks. We rest in order to continue, but we don't live for breaks. We don't live for rest. He says the Imams, they never had breaks. They would rest with their families to continue their work, but they weren't working so they can just retire. We don't have retirement. And he said, life is hard. Look at the Imams, the most beloved of Allah's creations, the Prophets. They all lived hard lives. It's hard. And you're shunned away from the people that you're trying to help. It happened with all of them. So he says, and he said it in a beautiful way. He's a very merciful person. He said, life is not about, chilling out and, smoking shisha at night with the boys and relaxing and going out. Because that's not really what life's about. And I think that if you're living your life just for rest and just to chill out and just to live luxuriously, then he says, in a very nice phrase, he put it, يراجع حساباته. He says, let him just re-look at his priorities. That's how he concluded. Let him rethink his priorities. And it's a beautiful, merciful way to say, stop being a waste man. But he says it in a very nice way. Alhamdulillah. Right? So rethink your priorities. And maybe we take his advice.
Ahsan. Thank you very much. So, brothers and sisters, we've got to wrap up the question and answer because there's not enough time. But if there's one thing that you should learn from today, the question and answer is that don't be a waste man and look at your priorities and make sure you're living for the right reasons. So, once again, apologies for those people whose questions we didn't get to. We will now follow with the Masiba, inshallah. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Mahdi. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجه. صلى الله عليك يا سيدي ويا مولاي يا ابن رسول الله. صلى الله عليك يا سيدي ويا مولاي يا أبا عبد الله يا مظلوم يا غريب كربلاء يا ليتنا كنا معكم سيدي فنفوز فوزا عظيما. Peace be upon the neck that the Prophet had kissed. Peace be upon the chest that the Prophet had embraced. Peace be upon the one who Rasulullah had spoken of. Hussain minni wa ana min Hussain. Hussain is from me and I am from Hussain. Ya Rasulullah, were you watching as your son called out in Karbala? Wahidan Farida, alone your son stood. هل من ناصر ينصرنا. He stood alone against the thousands who wanted revenge against you, Ya Rasulullah. His body was trampled by the horses. His armor was stripped from his body. His head was placed on a spear. He was killed thirsty, without a drop of water. Years later, when Imam Sajjad was gathered around by people and they asked him who was victorious on that day in Karbala, and Imam Sajjad replies, when you hear the adhan recited and you hear Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wa ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah, then you will know who was the one who was victorious on that day. And then he sees in the marketplace a butcher about to slaughter the lamb, and he stops him just before he slaughters the lamb, and he says, oh man, did you give the lamb water before you were about to cut its neck? And the butcher says, yes, of course. How can I be so cruel not to give it a cup of water? I give each animal a cup of water before I slaughter and cut its neck. Imam Sajjad's eyes filled with tears, and he called out, قتل الحسين بكربلاء عطشانا. Hussein was killed in Karbala, thirsty. ولعنة الله على قوم الظالمين إلى يوم القيامة. Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you very much, brother Sayed Makke. Brother and sister, thank you very much for tuning into our event. Thank all of you, and inshallah we'll see you guys in the next event. Assalamu alaikum, Sayyidina. Thank you very much for the very insightful speech tonight.
Salam Mahdi.
Assalamu alaikum.